Hello again, everyone. My name is Rose. I am the community educator at Women's Advocates. My job is to give these monthly webinars to educate the public about domestic violence. Today, we are diving into the basics, domestic violence 101. One of our core presentations that we have here at Women's Advocates, a very popular one that we give often. So thank you all for being here. If you have questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the chat. I can answer them as we go. If I don't know the answer to something, I will get that to you. I will make sure I find out and get you the information that you need. But again, thank you all for being here. And we're going to dive straight into domestic violence 101, what that may look like and sound like. If you've been here before to our webinars, you are not new to this, but if you are new here, we are Women's Advocates. We are a domestic violence shelter located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we offer all sorts of help. We have a 24/7 crisis line. We do a lot of education and outreach, which is exactly what we are doing right now, talking about domestic violence, trying to educate the public about what it is and what we can do to help out. We are a shelter, so we do have shelter space. If you call our crisis line, if you or anybody you know needs our help, feel free to call the crisis line and we will be in touch with you in terms of shelter space. And we offer things like housing stability and child support for all the victim survivors who stay in our shelter. So we do a lot of work helping a lot of victim survivors. We've been around for over 50 years now. And we started in the early 1970s as a legal advice helpline. We were helping a lot of women who were seeking to get away from their abusive spouses during this time. And a lot of the women who were working this legal helpline opened up their home to a lot of these women who were seeking help. And they would open up their bedrooms, attics, basements, you name it, and finding out that that was not a sustainable solution. And so the first domestic violence shelter in the nation was opened, called Women's Advocates. We are still here and strong. We are doing our thing, working towards trying to end domestic violence, educating about domestic violence and everything of the sort. If you would like to know more about us, feel free to visit our website. I am going to see if I can copy and paste our name here. It's also on the slide on the screen. It's just wadvocates.org. wadvocates.org in the chat as well. As we go, I will be copy and pasting a lot of different links and such into the chat. But that's just a little rundown about Women's Advocates and what we do. If anybody you know may need our services, feel free to have them reach out to us. Even if they are not in the Minnesota area, we will do our best to get information and resources to the folks that do need help. So with that, we're going to start on our domestic violence 101. I do have a poll that I want to do. I hope it's going to work with me. You never know with technology. Let me launch this poll. Can you all see the poll? If you can see it, can you take the poll for me? It's a basic question. What brings you to this webinar? What you want to know more about? There's no right or wrong answers here. It's just nice for me to gauge where everybody is at and why they are here today and what they want to know more about. I will give us a minute or two to take that poll, but we have two different parts today for the webinar. Part one, understanding the fundamental dynamics and impacts of abuse. And then we have part two, everyday ways to help support victim survivors. And as we dive into this, again, if you have questions, leave them in the chat for me. I see people are introducing themselves in the chat. If you are just joining now, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you are from, what you do, whatever you are comfortable sharing. A couple more seconds to take the poll and I will share the results with everyone. Okay. Thank you all for taking the poll. I'm going to end it now and share the results. So again, basic question, what brings you to this webinar? What are you hoping to learn? And we have answers all across the board, helping a friend or family member, a coworker, How to support survivors in a professional capacity is the most answered one. Not familiar with domestic violence and wanting to know more, and have learned about abuse before, but wanting to just kind of know more, brush up on a lot of the information that's given. Sounds good to me. Seeing folks just introducing themselves in the chat still. Thank you all for doing that. Nice to see where everybody is from, different places in the country. Always nice to see. But thank you all for taking the poll. Again, just good for me to gauge where everybody is at and what they want to know. With that, I'm going to get us started now. A quick disclaimer. This is, again, Domestic Violence 101. We do offer things like Domestic Violence 201, and all sorts of different topics regarding domestic violence when it comes to children experiencing domestic violence or healthy relationships, everything of the sort. If that is something that you are interested in, again, visit our website. Keep up with the core webinars that we give. As those start to come up, you can sign up as you wish. If you'd like to visit our YouTube channel, we have all of our webinars up there as well. Feel free to watch them. Reach out to us if you'd like a certificate of attendance. But today we are touching up on the basics of domestic violence. Jumping into part one, understanding the fundamental dynamics of abuse. So a question for all of us as we begin here, when you hear the term domestic violence, what are you thinking of? Who do you picture? What kind of relationship are you thinking of? And where have you seen or learned these ideas and views? You can think about that to yourself. If you'd like to add it into the chat and share your thoughts with everybody, you are welcome to do that as well. Excuse me. So whether you're here because we work with survivors, you work with survivors, you know somebody who is a victim survivor of domestic violence, we kind of have a certain idea in our heads of what domestic violence is or what it looks like. And I mean, really think about it. Who is the victim? Who is the perpetrator? You know, what do they look like? Race, ethnicity. Are they, what kind of, living situation are they in? Are they rich? Are they poor? What are we thinking of? Who are we thinking of? Again, if you'd like to share your thoughts in the chat, by all means, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, just kind of think about it to yourself. We all have this idea when we think of domestic violence. And we're gonna jump a little bit more into that and all the nuances that play into domestic violence and what it looks like. And with this, starting off, a lot of folks introducing themselves in the chat are not from the Minnesota area, but if you are, you know about the target field. So the statistics that we have on the screen is that we can fill up the target field 17 times with just women in Minnesota who have experienced sexual and or domestic violence. And the target field is huge. If you've been there before, it's huge. If you've never been there before, you're not in Minnesota, feel free to look it up. It is a huge, huge place. And you can fill it up 17 times with just women. We're not talking about children. We're not talking about men. Anybody across the gender spectrum, just women who have experienced sexual or domestic violence. If we can somehow magically get the magic number to all the unreported cases of domestic violence, men, children, everybody on the gender spectrum, we can fill up the target field so much more with victim survivors overall who have experienced domestic violence. So kind of just throwing this out there to give us a visual picture of how drastic domestic violence really is. And again, just talking about the Minnesota area specifically. But for this one, we want to talk about what happens in Minnesota and beyond. Being the first domestic violence shelter in the nation, we talk a lot about the statistics that comes with domestic violence. And on this slide, we have a lot more statistics just to throw at you. Domestic violence affects 1 in 4 Minnesota women. Women ages 18 to 34 have the highest risks of victimization. And again, that goes from physical violence, sexual violence. We're going to talk a lot about that, how domestic violence is beyond just physical in a bit here. But you can see domestic violence starts very, very young. About 1 in 5 high school girls have been physically or sexually abused by a dating partner. And last year in Minnesota, nearly 70,000 victims received services from domestic violence agencies. And the number just kind of skyrockets, especially during COVID. When that was happening, we saw our number skyrocket. The amount of people seeking shelter spaces and not getting the proper help that they needed was very, very rampant. And nearly 1/3 of homeless women in Minnesota are homeless, at least in part, because of domestic violence. We work with a lot of homeless individuals as well. We've tabled at a lot of organizations who serve homeless individuals. And a lot of abuse is happening there as well. A lot of people are homeless because they've been in abusive relationships. Domestic violence victims account for 1/4 of violent crimes victims in Minnesota, and an estimated 80% of domestic assaults go unreported. Most domestic violence assault cases go unreported. So to all the people that do report, a lot of them are not able to receive the help that they need, especially when working with the law and individuals who work with the law when it comes to domestic violence. There's a lot of stigmas against domestic violence victims. And again, we're going to jump into that as we go. But 80% of domestic violence assault cases do go unreported, and nearly 35% of all Minnesota law enforcement calls are domestic disputes. So, knowing all of that now, we want to jump into this one. This is one of my favorite personal slides when I talk about domestic violence or when I give these webinars, is that relationships exist on a spectrum. So we have our healthy spectrum, our unhealthy and abusive parts of a relationship. So in a healthy relationship means that both you and your partners are communicating. That is a huge one. Every time you're out in the public asking folks what makes a healthy relationship, the number one answer we get is communication. We have respectful, trusting, honest, equal, enjoy your personal time away from each other, making mutual choices and economic financial partners. Whether you choose to share your finances or you choose to keep it separately, the two of you are understanding of one another. And overall, just in a very healthy, loving relationship. And this is where people start to kind of get the two mixed up for unhealthy and abusive relationships. It's very understandable as to why there's a very thin line between the two. But we have an unhealthy relationship where you are not communicating, you're disrespectful towards one another, you're not trusting, dishonest, trying to take control of one another, only spending time together. You don't have any time alone away from this person. You are spending time together all the time. And people often see this as like couples, dating for the first time, being in love for the first time. It's very normal. But it gets to a point where it can be very unhealthy for the relationship if they are together all the time and there is no social life outside of the relationship. Pressured into activities and are unequal economically. And then we have the abusive side. Very different from the unhealthy side. But you are communicating, but in a hurtful or threatening way. Oftentimes it's one-sided. One person is being very, very hurtful, threatening towards the other person. You are mistreating each other, accusing the other of cheating when it's untrue, denying their actions are abusive, are very controlling, and isolating their partners from other people. So we have spending too much time together as a couple as your relationship progresses, and then we have controlling you and you are unable to spend time with friends or family members, even if you wanted to, because somebody is very much controlling you and isolating you from being able to hang out with other people. That falls under the abusive spectrum. So again, people tend to get the unhealthy and abusive relationships kind of mixed up. very thin line between the two. Wanting to throw it out there, though, that if you are in an unhealthy relationship, that's not something to kind of overlook or think to yourself that as long as you're not in an abusive one, you are okay. There are resources out there to help unhealthy relationships as well. Overall, whether you fall on the unhealthy or abusive side, we want to shift all of that into how we can really get you to be into the healthy spectrum of a relationship. So with that, if you have worked with victim survivors of domestic violence, if you've been to our webinars before, you are not new to this, but this is the power and control wheel. When we talk about domestic violence 101 and the basics, we always have to bring this up and touch up on it. Domestic violence or intimate partner violence is an intentional or systematic pattern of physical and psychological abuse, threats, intimidation, isolation, or economic coercion used by one person to really exert power and control over another. And a lot of that trying to exert the power control over another person is on the screen. It might be a little hard to read, but we have things like using their privileges, using children is a big one. Isolation, we talked about that just now, controlling, threats, coercion, everything of the sort falls into how one person can really try to exert power and control over the other person. And again, when it comes to an abusive relationship, it's one-sided where one person is very, very often abusive towards the other person. We're going to move on now, but if you have questions, comments so far, feel free to leave them in the chat. So, wanting to touch on this topic now, the anti-violence advocacy model and the legal system model. We have somebody, when we were doing research on this, called Dr. Ellen Pence, who kind of wrote the power and control wheel in the 70s. The 70s were when we also created women's advocates, when women's advocates came to life to house a lot of victim survivors. And it's true that the languages we use to kind of describe those who have experienced and those who have perpetrated domestic violence fall under kind of these categories that we see on the screen. We have the anti-violence advocacy model, where for the survivor is the person who experiences a pattern of power and control by another person. And we say it's a pattern because it is a 24/7 pattern where it happens constantly. It's not just one time where somebody screamed at you. It's not just one time where somebody struck you, hit you. That's not okay either. We don't condone it at all. However, that's how people tend to see domestic violence, where somebody hits you once. And that would mean that you are now in an abusive relationship. And you are, but when it comes to things like the law, or when people who don't know a lot about domestic violence are learning about domestic violence, they don't consider things like emotional abuse or mental abuse. It has to get physical, and it has to only involve physical abuse, which we know is not the case. And again, we're going to dive a lot more into that as we go here. But the victim survivor experiences a pattern of power and control by another person. And the abuser, the person who establishes a pattern of power control over another. So the anti-violence advocacy model, we understand that people who abuse their partners, establish a pattern of control, again, occurs 24/7, exploit their partners over time, using a number of tactics to really exert the power and control over the victim survivor. And this is the model that we try to use a lot in our work and what we do. We also have the legal system model. So when it comes to the legal system model, or when it comes to just the legal system overall, trying to help victim survivors, there's a lot that can be fixed, a lot that can be done, more that can be done. So in the legal system model, a victim is a person against whom a crime has been committed. And the perpetrator is a person who has committed a qualifying crime against a person. And a lot of times the legal system is made to designed to address specific incidents and determine if they are legal or illegal. Usually evaluates moments in times, not patterns of abusive behaviors. Again, a lot to do when it comes to the legal system and trying to work with victim survivors. So for example, to the legal system, if a victim survivor was not physically harmed in some way, therefore it wasn't illegal. If somebody shouted at them, if somebody threw something at them, but whatever they threw did not hit them, that's totally, in many cases, fine to the legal system. You know, the victim survivor was not physically hurt in any way, therefore the victim survivor is fine. And that's not something that we want to that's not something we want to work on. That's not something that we want to teach. When we are giving these webinars, we very much want to let everybody know that there is more to domestic violence than just physical violence. And a lot of times people tend to focus strictly on physical violence. And if a victim survivor was not physically harmed, therefore they were not in an abusive relationship. And so when working with victim survivors and when we talk about domestic violence, we tend to use the anti-violence advocacy model a lot more to help a lot of folks understand that domestic violence goes beyond just physical violence. We have things like mental, financial, that's also a big one that a lot of people tend to overlook, digital. And we see it all the time where perpetrators would use children to really isolate and control the victim survivor as well, especially if they share custody of children. So with that, this one is really talking about recognizing the warning signs of abusive behaviors. I'm going to go into all of them. However, I'm also going to launch another poll. So which of these 4 warning signs do you think are the most challenging to identify early on in a relationship? Social isolation, harmful criticism, constant blame, or harmful anger? If you can take the poll for me, that would be great. But recognizing the warning signs of abusive behaviors. For the first one, social isolation, that may sound like something that a perpetrator would say is, do you really need to see your family again this weekend? To feel close to you, I really need to have as much one-on-one time as possible. You don't need to talk to your friends as much as you do. The next one we have is harmful criticism. What a perpetrator might say there is, you know, you're not really as smart as you think you are. You talk so passionately about things that you think you understand, but it actually just reveals how dumb you are. That's why you need me. A constant blame. What that sounds like is you always complain about what I'm doing, what I'm not doing to help out at home. And that really impacts my ability to concentrate at work. So it's your fault that I got fired and now we won't be able to pay the rent this month. So not really owning up to your mistakes, right? Always constantly blaming the victim survivor. We then have harmful anger, and what that may sound like is sometimes you really piss me off. There's something about you that just makes me enraged, but you can't hold the things I do when I'm mad against me. It isn't the real me. Anger makes me do things. And want to throw out there that anger is okay. Feeling anger, especially in relationships when you are working as a team, sometimes you disagree on things, right? Sometimes you don't like what the other person has said or done, and you have to express that. Anger is fine. Very normal human emotion. However, how we respond to that anger is what matters. And when we talk about abusive relationships, a lot of times folks get very physical, threats, harm, everything of the sort comes with the anger, which makes the relationship, of course, abusive. Thank you all for taking the poll. I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. So again, which of these 4 warning signs do you think are the most challenging to identify early on in a relationship? And most of you said social isolation. We have answers all across the board, but the #1 answer is social isolation. And you would be right on this one. Really, getting into a relationship early on, a lot of times, again, you want to spend time together. You want to be together all the time. So if somebody were to be isolating you from your friends and family, you wouldn't really know. People wouldn't really think twice about it. Even if you are not part of the relationship, friends and family outside of the relationship looking in, you just think to yourself, like they are new into this relationship. They really like each other. They want to spend time together. It's understandable why they would be together all the time. But as time goes on, it can get very unhealthy and it can get very abusive in a relationship if it progresses. Thank you all for taking that poll. A couple more polls coming your way. A couple more recognizing the warning signs of abusive behaviors. I'm going to launch another poll. And this one says, which of these 4 warning signs do you think are most often normalized in our society? You can take that poll from me now. We have manipulative jealousy, intentional sabotage, excessive control, and strategic intensity. Again, often normalized. But here on the screen, as you guys take that poll, we have manipulative jealousy, saying something like, I saw you talking to that guy at your work. You can't talk to other people. You're giving them the wrong idea. And if you really cared about me, you wouldn't go out of your way to engage with him. You need to remove him from your contacts. Manipulative jealousy is what that sounds like. For excessive control, what that may sound like is saying something like, are you really going to go out looking like that? It's like you want people to think you're single. No one needs to see you looking like that. I really don't like you wearing things like that in public. We then have intentional sabotage. You know, you have that work. I know you have that work meeting today, but I really need you. That's why I hid your keys to stall you so I could explain to you that you need to prioritize me more. So intentionally sabotaging somebody, making them late to work, late to an event, you know, will fall under abusive relationships as well. And the last one that we have is strategic intensity. So saying something like, I've never met anyone like you before. I think you're my soulmate. That's why I send you so many flowers at work and want to talk to you all the time. I want to meet your parents and I think we should spend most nights together. So we see this, we hear this all the time as well. We're coming on to somebody very, very strong, letting them know like we are meant to be together. We are soulmates. Especially if this is happening very, very early on in a relationship. If you work with victim survivors, I'm sure you know the phrase as well, love bombing falls right into strategic intensity. So just again, part 2 of recognizing the warning signs of abusive behavior. Thank you all for taking the poll. I am going to end it now and share the results with everyone. Again, which of these 4 signs do you think are most often normalized in our society? The top 3 answers, we have manipulative jealousy, excessive control, and strategic intensity. So, you know, we see this all the time as well within media, people that we work with, maybe even in real life, friends and family members, but movies, TV shows, books, wherever. You can find entertainment, manipulative jealousy, right? Where people think that being jealous of your partner is a very cute thing. It's adorable. It means that they love you. It means they care for you. It can very, very easily turn abusive though. And we don't want to normalize abuse if things can turn dangerous for a victim survivor. Excessive control. Yeah. I think the example that we have on the screen is oftentimes one that we hear and see all the time as well. And then strategic intensity where somebody is just coming onto you very, very strong. It sounds very nice at the beginning stages. And again, to folks outside of the relationship, it might also sound very nice. This person just, you know, thinks you guys are meant to be. They're complimenting you all the time. They're sending you flowers at work. It must be great. It doesn't immediately mean that you are in an abusive relationship. However, we want to be very, very cautious, especially if this is very early on in a relationship, especially if this person has other motives there as to why they are being so kind and generous. And a lot of times people tend to kind of overlook that. So thank you all for taking the poll. It seems like we all have a pretty good understanding of what's often normalized and what these abusive behaviors kind of look and sound like already. So this slide is recognizing the warning signs of abusive behaviors. And it just has a long list of asking you if somebody you love does any of the things, tell you that you never do anything right, show extreme jealousy of your friends or time spent away from them. And if you answer, yes to a lot of these questions on the screen, you might be in a very unhealthy or abusive relationship. And if that is the case, feel free to reach out for help. We highly, highly encourage folks to reach out for help if they were to need it. We also have a link. I'm going to link it into the chat. This is the relationship quiz called Is Your Relationship Healthy by Love is Respect? I'm going to link that in the chat if you are interested in taking that quiz. It's a quick quiz you take where you kind of just answer a couple questions to see if your relationship is healthy. If you'd like to share this link with anybody else out there, feel free to copy and paste it, open it up, share it with folks, let them know. Let them take the quiz and see if they are in a healthy relationship or not. And then of course, if not, reach out for help. You know about us, feel free to reach out for us, getting resources, anything of the sort. But on the screen here are just a lot of warning signs of abusive behavior to kind of look out for. With that, we are going to watch a short 4-minute video outlining the 4 signs of emotional abuse. So we've talked about how domestic violence goes beyond just physical abuse. I'm going to play this video for us to kind of dive deeper into emotional abuse and what that may look like in unhealthy relationships. If the audio is not working, can somebody let me know in the chat? However, if it is working, can somebody just simply type out like a yes in the chat, just for me to know? Here we go. Can we hear it? Yes? Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Emotional abuse can be incredibly damaging, increasing a person's chances of developing depression and anxiety, sometimes for decades after the fact. Broadly speaking, emotional abuse involves one person controlling another by undermining their sense of self-worth and personal agency. But emotionally abusive behaviors can be subtle and difficult to spot, both from within and outside the abusive relationship. That's partly because emotional abuse often exploits or creates power imbalances between individuals, especially in relationships where safety, care, and trust are supposed to be guaranteed. Like the relationship between a caregiver and a child, healthcare provider and patient, teacher and student, or intimate partners. It's especially insidious because it often makes people doubt their perceptions of their own mistreatment. So let's walk through some of the most common signs of emotional abuse to make these behaviors and patterns easier to spot in real life. First, the content of someone's words. Criticism that's out of proportion to a situation, excessively harsh or personal, or makes sweeping generalizations or baseless negative predictions for the future is a warning sign of emotional abuse. Statements like, "You always make such stupid decisions," "You never do anything right," and "Nobody else will ever love you," aren't constructive, they're never warranted, and someone's use of them is a red flag. Second, tone and nonverbal cues. Yelling, ignoring, and showing contempt through body language are all ways to degrade someone. Dismissive behaviors like eye-rolling, glaring, or refusal to make eye contact, along with refusing to speak to someone or acknowledge their presence, sometimes called the silent treatment, can all feature in patterns of emotional abuse. These behaviors can painfully transform the meaning of spoken statements that might otherwise seem benign. Third, how someone reacts to being told they've said or done something hurtful can give important insight. Do they apologize sincerely and act differently in the future? Or do they dismiss and minimize the pain they've caused? It's common for abusers to try to undermine their target's perceptions of events. This is sometimes referred to as gaslighting, following up demeaning, humiliating, or threatening remarks with comments that dismiss the impact of those remarks, like, "I'm just trying to help you improve yourself. You should be grateful." Or, "It's really you that's selfish and manipulative. You're hurting me," are examples of this behavior. Lastly, when someone directs any of these behaviors at you, take note of whether this is part of a pattern of behavior from them. A one-time incident of name-calling or a demeaning insult might not be emotional abuse, while repetition over time can have a much more serious impact. Both frequency, how often these behaviors occur in a given period of time, and duration, how long they last, whether days or years, can contribute to the severity of the abuse. It's also important to remember that abusers rarely engage in abusive behaviors 100% of the time. Moments of kindness or calm don't invalidate moments of abuse, but are actually part of the cycle of emotional manipulation. So what can you do if you think you or someone you care about is experiencing emotional abuse? Maintaining interpersonal ties with people other than the abuser is crucial, as abusers often try to isolate their targets from others close to them. If you think you might be experiencing emotional abuse, consider sharing your experiences with a trusted friend or relative to get outside support. Or you can seek local or national confidential advocacy centres that can provide helpful resources. And if you think someone you know is being emotionally abused, check in with them. Let them know you're thinking of them and that you're ready to listen whenever they'd like to share. While emotional abusers may convince people that they deserve to be mistreated, nobody does. Everyone deserves kindness and respect.
Okay. Again, short little video. Hopefully it was helpful about emotional abuse and what that may look like, and just diving a lot deeper into that now, how domestic violence is not limited to physical assault. We have on the screen we have physical, verbal, emotional, financial, sexual assault, and using children. I'm going to launch another poll. Work with me. Here it is. So which three of the following forms of abuse are you interested in learning more about? On the screen, we have, again, physical, verbal, emotional, financial, sexual, and using children. And a couple more is using pets and property, mental abuse, social, digital, spiritual, and legal. So hearing all of these, which three of the following are you hoping to learn more about? And this is multiple choice, so you can take all three of the answers if you'd like. I can give us a couple seconds to do that, and then I will share the results. But going back to the other slide, just so again, everybody gets to see how physical assault is not the only form of abuse when it comes to domestic violence. And again, when victim survivors do report abuse, a lot of times people ask them if they were physically assaulted, physically abused in any way. And if the answer is no, and they experience a lot of emotional abuse or mental abuse, people kind of brush it off as you two need to just, kind of work it out, right? It's not abuse, it's not assault. Therefore, you were not in an abusive relationship. And not the case at all. As an organization, a domestic violence organization, we feel it is our duty to let everybody know that there is a lot of abuse that goes beyond just physical abuse. If anybody has any thoughts, feelings about this, and they feel comfortable sharing in the chat, by all means, feel free to do so. Again, the second slide of what that may look like. Okay, going to end the poll now and share the results with you all. No right or wrong answers. It's really you personally. Which 3 of the following forms of abuse are you interested in learning more about? We have answers all across the board. With the top answers, tying being legal abuse being the top one. We have spiritual abuse, digital abuse, social abuse, and using children to harm. These are the top ones. Again, no right or wrong answer. It's just good for me to gauge where everybody is at if they want to know more about these things. And with that, if you'd like to know more by seeing a lot more webinars, if you'd like to reach out to us afterwards to get more information, resources about these things, feel free to do so. But with legal resources, with legal abuse, excuse me, and spiritual abuse being the top ones. Good to know. And I guess a lot of these are oftentimes overlooked. People probably don't even think about them as being abuse. But they are, and it's good to kind of talk about it now. So again, for legal, what we have on the screen is refusing court orders, immigration threats, false CPS reports, preventing access to legal advice, interfering or destroying legal documents would all fall under things like legal abuse. Then we have spiritual, so disparaging beliefs, forcing beliefs, using beliefs to justify abuse, diminishing spiritual identity and connectedness. All fall under spiritual abuse. These slides will be sent out to you afterwards. Feel free to look out for that. So if you'd like to go through all of them and read what each abuse may look like and sound like, by all means, feel free to take a look at that once you get access to the slides. And if you wait till the end of today's webinar, you will also get access to the slides as well. A link will be sent to you through the chat. But on the screen now, common traits of people who do use abuse. We have things like critical, inconsistent, controlling, narcissistic, a big one, charming, intentional, vengeful, blaming, threatening, manipulative, also a big one. Common traits of people who use abuse. And I feel like charming is one that people tend to not really think about. And just because somebody is charming, right, doesn't mean that they are automatically abusive. They could be a very nice, kind individual. However, a lot of people who do use abuse do have this trait as well, a very charming, very convincing. We hear this all the time, especially when victim survivors are working with the legal system, with cops, in court with judges. Somebody can turn very, very charming in front of the law, but behind closed doors, it's not like that at all. And just thinking it to yourself, do any of these stick out to you? Do any of these surprise you? And if you can think of more that's not on the screen, feel free to leave them in the chat. What are other common traits of people who use abuse that you've seen or heard of? If you're typing out in the chat and I move on to the next slide, please do not stop typing out in the chat. Feel free to keep typing out your thoughts and post it for us. I'd love to see what you all are thinking. But on the screen is how domestic violence is a public health crisis, violation of human rights, and forms of complex trauma. So what are the identities of the people that abusive individuals often target? And whether we are aware of it or not, we all have an image in our head of what a survivor looks like. We even have a term for it where people tend to call it the perfect victim. We're in our heads, right? In the media, how is somebody being portrayed? What do they look like? Is it a man? Is it a woman? What's their race? How tall are they? And so, yeah, a term that we hear all the time and we use to describe what a survivor may look like to a lot of people, especially in the media, and what people tend to think about. But what fuels comments like asking things like, but you don't look like a victim, or I didn't think people like you experienced abuse. Hearing stuff like that from people can be just, it makes you feel small, like you can't trust them, or you can't find help from other people, or you start to feel like you are the issue here. You are at fault somehow, because if you don't look like a victim, if people don't think you're a victim, in their heads, if you are not the quote unquote perfect victim, um, there's something's wrong with you, right? Like you are not doing something right. You are at fault. Maybe this abusive person is right, putting all the blame on you. And that is not the case at all. Again, wanting to make that very, very clear. Anybody can be a perpetrator. Anybody can be a victim. But we hold very different identities. A lot of abuse when it comes to working with the law can be very, very tricky. We see this all the time and time again. Things like racism exist, right? Classism exists, being in poverty. If you can't afford proper help, if you can't afford to get away from an abusive relationship, it makes things harder. And on this slide, talking more about that, intersection forms of oppression. Again, classism, sexism, racism, immigration status, your religion, your age, everything of the sort can make it harder for you to find help, especially if you don't feel comfortable, for example, calling 911, reporting abuse, knowing that the law is not going to be on your side because of your race, because of your age, because of your sex. So also like social stigmas as well, stereotypes, everything of the sort. If you are a man and you are going through an abusive relationship, a lot of times people don't want to report the abuse because to society, right, a man is supposed to be the one in charge. A man is supposed to be the one head of the household, So if your wife, a woman, is abusing you, then what does that make you to society? And people tend to not report abuse because of these social stigmas. And we want to encourage everybody to report their abuse whenever they feel comfortable doing so, to receive the proper help that they need, which is being very, very real. And we all know this. Again, if you also work with victim survivors, I'm sure you come across these issues as well, that a lot of our identities, sometimes it's hard to really find the help that you need, especially when people are not working with you or working against you. With that, somebody said in the chat, hypersensitive is interesting to me when it comes to all the traits. Would like to elaborate on that? Feel free to do so. Why is it interesting? Or, just something you kind of thought of when you were looking at all the traits. You never really thought about it before, but thank you for putting that in the chat. And on this slide, we have factors that can kind of contribute to the use of abusive behaviors. I'm going to launch another poll. We have a lot of polls coming your way, but this one says, I have heard of abuse being attributed to, and it's a multiple choice one, so you can pick as many as you want on the screen. But what have you heard abuse being attributed to? If somebody is being abusive, what is happening? Why are they being abusive? A lot of times, how do people justify abuse as well? Give you a couple of seconds, a minute or two to take the poll, and then I will share the results and talk more about that. Again, it's multiple choice, so you can pick as many as you want. Okay. I am going to stop the poll now and share the results. We have answers all across the board. So use of alcohol and drugs. The abusive person has depression, anxiety, PTSD. mental abuse from both parties, right? The person experiencing it must like it. Another big one. The abusive person had a bad childhood or was abused when they were a child. That's another big one as well. The abusive person lacks communication and conflict resolution skills. The abusive person is stressed or has poor self-esteem. Yeah. And if you chose all of these, again, no right or wrong answers here, because we hear this all the time when people talk about abuse, why somebody is being abusive, when they try to justify abuse. We see and hear a lot of these as well. Especially, I think the top one that folks picked was the abusive person had a bad childhood or was abused. We hear that as well. If you've been abused, you're gonna grow up to be abusive. If this person experienced or witnessed a lot of abuse when they were a child, they're gonna grow up and do and perpetrate the same thing, right? And we talk a lot about this when in a lot of our other webinars where we talk about children experiencing abuse, everything of the sort. Again, all on YouTube if you'd like to check those out. But believe it or not, the whole a person is abusive because when they were a child, they were abused in some way. Therefore, now as an adult, they are also abusive. Doesn't justify abuse. It doesn't give the person like a free pass to be abusive, right? We still want to hold these people accountable. We still want to educate the public on how that's not okay. Different forms of abuse, offering help to individuals, even as adults. You experience something as a child, and now as an adult, you can still get help for that. You can still talk about that. But thank you all for taking that poll. A lot of polls today. Thank you all for bearing with me with the polls, but another one will be coming your way very shortly here. So just some social norms, heteronormative beliefs that excuse and normalize abuse that we hear and see all the time. Again, with the jealousy shows that somebody cares for you and that they love you. Can very, very easily turn into an abusive relationship. Men should exercise total control in their relationships. Another social norm that we see and hear all the time. Again, and then when it comes to working with men, when it comes to abuse, it creates that sort of barrier, right? We just talked about that, where all these social norms are working against you, and there are these social stigmas against you, and so reporting abuse just becomes a little bit tougher for the individual. Sex is owed in a marriage or romantic relationship, and consent is implied. Another one that we see all the time. But yeah, a lot of different social norms on the screen. If you can think of any more that you'd like to add in the chat, please, by all means, feel free to do so. But a lot of these on the screen now then kind of excuse and normalize abuse for the public. And when people start to see these public behaviors or these public abusive behaviors, they don't immediately think of abuse because it's so normalized to them, especially again with the entertainment that we take in. Not saying that you can't enjoy a good movie or a good show or read a good book. It's just sometimes when we see these things, we want to be able to recognize them and call it out. So this is another slide that I really like talking about when I give these presentations, barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. I'm sure in the public, or if you work with victim survivors, or maybe you yourself have heard these a lot before, where somebody is in an abusive relationship, and the solution that a lot of people give them is, why don't you just leave, right? Why don't you just pack your bags and go? Why don't you just get up and leave the relationship? Without knowing that there are many barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. And so things like threats or fear of increased violence, wanting to make it very clear, if you don't know already, you will know now that leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for a victim survivor. This is when we see murder rates go up. This is when we see violence, threats, everything physical abuse, everything just kind of skyrockets. We see it all the time where a victim survivor would die because they tried to leave an abusive relationship. They tried to leave this abusive individual. And so if your life is on the line, if you have children and their lives are on the line, a lot of people find it very, very tough to just get up and leave an abusive relationship. And if they are going to leave, a lot of times they have to do it in secret. If the abusive person is not home, they would take that chance to really pack up their stuff and try to get away from the abusive individual without them knowing, because if the abusive person were to know, their life would be in danger. Reliance on an abuser's or the abuser's family for childcare, financial support, and housing. Just thinking about it right now, hypothetically, if you were in an abusive relationship and somebody tells you to just get up and leave that house, leave the abusive person, you know, where are you going to go? Where are you going to stay? You have the money to rent a place, to stay in a hotel, you know, to go somewhere. Where exactly are you going to go if you were to leave that household? It's not as easy as just getting up and leaving. And again, a lot of folks end up being homeless because of abusive relationships. So with that financial support as well, the victim survivor is probably forced to work by the abusive person, and they are probably the only one working. The abusive person is in control of the money. They don't get to spend their money, nothing of the sort. They don't have any money. Or the perpetrator is the one working and they refuse to let the victim survivor work. And again, the abusive individual is also in charge of all the money, everything of the sort. The victim survivor has really no say in any of that. So financial support, financial safety, financial security, everything of the sort can be very, very tough. Trying to navigate for a victim survivor if they were to leave an abusive relationship. The risk of suicide by the abuser, a big one that we see. Financial barriers, yep. Victim blaming, shame, and embarrassment, that's a big one. When we work with victim survivors, we want to make sure that they have a strong support system, and a lot of times they don't. Lack of knowledge about supportive services. Maybe they don't know about certain shelter spaces. They don't know that there are shelter spaces and organizations out there to help them. And you don't know what you don't know. So we do our best to talk about shelter spaces, talk about domestic violence in case anybody were to need our resources. Individuals like you who are here right now, if you know anybody who do need our services, let them know about us so they do know where to go and what to do if they were to try and leave an abusive relationship. Insufficient institutional responses and lack of support system, and love and responsibility for the abuser, and they hope for change. This last one, people have strong opinions on it. We do have a webinar all about this called Grief After an Abusive Relationship, where we touch up on loving somebody who is abusive towards you and other people might not understand it. Hoping for change, you know, hoping for potential, seeing the potential, everything of the sort. If that is something that you are interested in knowing and learning more about, again, feel free to visit our YouTube channel. We have it uploaded up there. It's called Grief After an Abusive Relationship. Watch that to know more about this. Again, one where people don't really understand why you would have so much love left for somebody who is abusive towards you. But it is a very, very real feeling that a lot of victim survivors go through, and we don't want to make them feel shame in any way for feeling that way. And domestic violence impacts the person as a whole. This is often one that we also talk about a lot in our webinars. But we have things from emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational, and social. Going through an abusive relationship impacts every aspect of what you are seeing on the screen, not just physical. And we touched on that. We talked about that a lot just now, how domestic violence goes beyond just physical abuse. So if you are in an abusive relationship, it impacts every dimension of a person. So when we work with victim survivors, we have to kind of now tackle everything all at once. It's not just simply physically getting them into safety. We have to work with them emotionally. We have to find ways to work with them financially, helping them with their credit, how they can pay rent if they were to move out and live on their own without the abusive individual. Now, everything of the sort, we have to tackle it all at once. On this slide, we have the physical health impacts and the emotional health impact when you are in an abusive relationship. So of course, for physical, we have things like injuries, headaches and migraines are a big one, insomnia is a big one, chronic pain. A lot of people develop chronic pain later on in life when they are in an abusive relationship for a long period of time. Choking sensations, hyperventilation, everything from their physical health being impacted in very, very negative ways. And of course, we have emotional health, so higher rates of PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Suicidal ideation and attempts is also a big one that we see and hear about. Profound and lasting changes in sociological arousal, emotional cognition, and memories. Memory loss is a big one that we see in victim survivors, and we know that a lot of times your brain trying to protect you from all of the abuse and trauma that you've been through, right? You don't blocking out a lot of memories, a lot of the abuse, trying to keep you safe. And so a lot of victim survivors tend to have a lot of memory loss as well when working with them. Changes in productivity and concentration. Again, if there's any other that you can think of when it comes to physical health impacts and emotional health impacts that you'd like to leave in the chat, by all means, feel free to do so. I'd love to read them. But now we're going to move on to part 2, everyday ways to really support victim survivors. So I have a couple scenarios on the screen that we're going to kind of go through. Leave your answers in the chat for me. I'm going to read it out loud for us. Your friend Elijah and a guy she met at work, John, have been going out for a while. One day, John showed up at Elijah's school and saw her give a male friend a hug. John grabbed her arm and pulled her to his car, where he called her a slut and a cheater. If you saw this happen, would you A, you would tell Elijah that you were concerned about her and help her find advocacy resources? B, you would tell another friend and hope that they would do something to help Elijah? Or C, you would leave it alone. If Elijah didn't say anything to you, it's not your place to get involved. So throw your answers in the chat. What would you do in this scenario? A. The A's are coming in. You would tell Elijah that you were concerned about her and help her find advocacy resources. Yeah. And now that you know about us, women's advocates, feel free to refer people to us. Again, even if they are not in the Minnesota area, we would do our best to find resources to help them. Somebody said we need to do A, but often don't. But we often don't. Thank you for bringing that up. That is a very, very real thing to say. And I think a lot of people would kind of agree as well. A lot of folks would do it, but there are often times where people would see it and they know that they should help, they should step in, but they don't, right? We talked a lot about this in our Domestic Violence 201 webinars, going deeper into why a lot of people tend not to step in when it comes to abuse, why there are a lot of bystanders, and why it's oftentimes uncomfortable for folks to kind of step in when it comes to abuse. But thank you for bringing that up. That is a very real response. However, knowing about us as at Women's Advocates, if you work with a lot of victim survivors as well, and you'd like to share your organization so folks can kind of reach out to you, share them in the chat. We can bounce off one another. So if we do see somebody that does need help when it comes to abuse and they need resources and you don't know any resources, you do now. You know about us, different organizations who offer help. A second one, again, I'm going to read it out loud for us. Rebecca and Janet met at the mall. When they first began dating, Rebecca was very sweet. Over time, she started putting Janet down and once ended a fight by slapping her. things got worse, and Rebecca told Janet if she ever left her, Rebecca would kill herself. If you knew about all of this and another friend asked you if you thought Janet was okay, A, you would tell them to stay out of it. They are both women. There is no such thing as an abusive LGBTQ plus relationship. B, you would pretend you didn't know and tell them to ask Janet directly. Or C, you would tell them that you were also concerned about Janet and that both of you should go together to offer your help. A lot of you are answering already. C. Sometimes it's easier to approach abuse when you are with a friend, when there's more of you together. So that's what needs to be done in order to help a friend out. By all means, ask a friend, somebody trustworthy, right? But C would be the correct answer. You know, C is what we would want people to do. Talking to Janet, offering help, whatever you can do. And another answer that I want to touch up on is A, where you would tell them to stay out of it. They are both women. There's no such thing as an abusive LGBTQ plus relationship. Again, going on with stereotypes, people tend to think that women are the victim of abuse and men are the perpetrators. And so if two women were in a relationship together, there is no such thing as abuse because women are the victims. They are not the perpetrators. And we know that's not the case. Not the case at all. Can still be in a very abusive relationship, even if it's two women, two men, can still all have abuse in their relationships. And so a stereotype is something that people kind of push, a narrative that people tend to push, that's not true. Somebody wrote in the chat, a lot of people are saying C. Okay. Somebody wrote in the chat, one day I witnessed a couple arguing in the parking lot at a store, and the woman was clearly being verbally abused by her boyfriend because he was threatening and pushing her. I approached her and she I approached her and she didn't get help because she was scared. And I reported to the manager and she threatened to call the police. Yeah, so glad you were there to be able to help that individual out. Sometimes people tend to turn a blind eye because the people that's going through abuse isn't an individual that we know personally. And so any chance you get to help out an individual, even if it's a stranger, highly, highly recommend. Thank you for doing that. It at least created awareness. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. If anybody has any similar situations that they've been in and they feel comfortable sharing, by all means, throw it in the chat. So thank you all for taking, doing those scenarios with me. But this one, on this slide, responding to a disclosure, we have the Blazer technique created by Ramsey County SOS, a great organization here in the St. Paul area as well. I'm going to launch a poll for us. Last poll of the day. If you haven't taken any of the polls today, now's your chance. But I'll give us a minute or two to take this poll. Which of the following actions do you want to focus on improving the most the next time you interact with a victim survivor? And on the screen, we have believe, listen, affirm, support, empower, and refer. The acronym for it would be Blazer. Again, giving you a minute to take that poll. What do you want to focus on the most? So believing the victim survivors, believing their stories, listening to them. Sometimes you don't know what to say when it comes to abuse. It could be a lot. So simply listening is all you can do. And sometimes that's all that's needed, really. Affirming the victim survivors, supporting them, empowering them, and referring them to resources if they were to need it. Couple more seconds for the poll, and then I will end it and share the results. Again, last poll of the day. If you haven't taken a poll today, this is your chance. Okay. Thank you all for taking that poll, sharing the results. The top two answers is support and empower. Again, no right or wrong answers here. It really is what you would like to do the most when you are interacting with victim survivors. Anything on the screen, from believe, listen, affirm, support, empower, refer, would be very, very helpful and useful when working with victim survivors. But the top two is to support and empower victim survivors. Thank you for taking that poll, and I hope that by being here today, knowing more about domestic violence, you are able to support and empower a lot of victim survivors. If you chose these answers and you'd like to share in the chat how you plan on supporting victim survivors or empowering victim survivors, by all means, throw them in the chat as well. Thank you all for taking the poll. This is a trauma-informed approach when it comes to working with victim survivors. The question we have on the screen is, what's one way you could put these values into action when supporting the survivors in your life? So we have things ranging from trust, safety, collaboration, choice, empowerment, and having compassion. And this is how we can apply these trauma-informed lenses. So again, with the placer techniques, trusting the victim survivors, believing their stories, right? When they tell you the abuse that they've been through, not glossing over it, not trying to justify abuse in any way, but believing them, trusting them. Safety, letting them know that their emotional and physical safety is important to you. You care for them, you want them to be safe, and you're willing to collaborate with them to find safety if they were to need it. And collaboration is a big one. Being able to gain the trust of victim survivors is a big one. And collaborating with them, being able to help them is something that we highly encourage. Allowing victim survivors to make their own choices. Empowerment, just going right off the poll that we just took, a lot of people want to focus on empowerment, how you can empower them by what you say and what you do. And of course, having compassion, understanding that trying to escape abuse is tough. It's hard to do, puts the victim survivor in a very, very dangerous situation. And it's not as easy as just getting up and going, having compassion, understanding. If somebody tells you about the abusive situation that they were in a couple years later, right? Like a year, 2 years have gone by, you had no idea this was happening, and they finally open up to you about the abuse that they've been through, to immediately not have this reaction where, why didn't you tell me sooner? You know, we could have done something sooner, but to have compassion, to have empathy, to understand that it takes a lot to just talk about these issues and situations that they've been in. Traumatic, a lot, and so having compassion. And all of these really tie into each other as well. Collaborating builds trust. In order to find safety, help somebody with safety, you need to collaborate, allowing the victim survivors to make their own choices. They trust you more as you allow them to do that. Empowering them, compassion, all ties in together. On this slide, we talk about supporting holistic safety. So again, going off how domestic violence is beyond physical violence, how we can support people holistically, how we can support them physically, socially, emotionally, digitally, mentally, and really just tackle everything all at once. And any chance that we get to do that, we want to be able to do that because the damage has been done for a lot of victim survivors. And it impacts the person as a whole. Going back to the couple of slides that we saw back. And so every chance that we get to support somebody holistically, we want to be able to support that, encourage that. This slide is talking about how we can avoid victim blaming and minimizing a victim survivor, and instead how we can center validation, beliefs, and autonomy. So instead of saying the things on the left, we want to say the things on the right. So instead of saying something like, how did you let this happen to you? Nobody wants to be abused, right? Nobody's letting it happen. Instead of saying things like, did you provoke them? I think these are things that we hear all the time in the media, right? What were you wearing? Did you lead them on? You know, stuff like that. Are you sure that happened? Are you sure that's what happened? Are you sure that's what they said? The victim blaming mindset. And we want to switch it over to the rights where you believe them. Letting them know that they are not alone, that they deserve love and respect, that it's not their fault. And overall, that you just believe them, letting them know that their story matters, their feelings are valid. They are allowed to be angry at this. They are allowed to feel sad. They are allowed to cry. Again, if you can think of any other ways to help center and validate a victim survivor, leave it in the chat. And the real thing that we want to touch up on as we are ending the webinar today, accountability. If you know someone who is being abusive, hold them accountable. A lot of times we tell victim survivors what they can do, what they can't do, where they can go, how they should prepare when it comes to abuse, but people don't talk enough about holding the abusive individual accountable. It's very likely that you know somebody now, or you have known somebody who has been in an abusive relationship. Maybe you work with them. Maybe, again, strangers out in the streets. Somebody is going through something. And we want to be able to hold the abusive person accountable. Does not mean that you put your own safety in jeopardy, but any chance that we get to hold the abusive person accountable for their actions, we want to be able to do so. Ties right into the slide before, where we validate belief and kind of center the victim survivor rather than going off of a very victim blaming mindset. If there are other ways you can think of where we can hold an abuser accountable, feel free to leave that in the chat. But something to kind of keep in mind as we are ending off today. With that, this is just further what we can do to kind of model healthy relationships, talk about healthy relationships, educate healthy relationships. We have webinars on healthy relationships as well. If that is something you are interested in, feel free to, again, visit our YouTube channel and look that up. But these are resources, Minnesota specific and national and international resources for you. These slides will be sent out to you in a bit here. Contact information with us. As we are ending off for the day, we have an online survivor support group. It is open gender. We used to have two, but now we just have one. It is open to everybody. Feel free to let people know about us. If you are interested, feel free to scan the QR code on the screen, let people know about us, be in touch with us. We will be in touch with them as that support group starts up again. It is all through Zoom. It is online. So anybody can join wherever you are. Even if you're not from Minnesota, you can join as well because it's through Zoom. It's great. So let them know about that. But that is all we have for the day. Thank you all for being here, for participating in the polls, for leaving your thoughts in the chat, doing the scenarios, everything of the sort. Thank you, everybody, for just being here to learn more about domestic violence and being very, very great in the chat with all your responses. I'm going to